There are airports all over the world that make you go, how and why did they build that there? Like, did you know there's an airport with a 2,000-foot cliff at the end and another that's steeper than a ski hill? In today's video, we're going to explore some of the world's most impossible airports. And some of these airports aren't just marvels of engineering. They're also the vital connection that keeps these communities alive. One airport that falls squarely into the category of marvels of engineering is the Kansai Airport in Japan. In the 1980s, the city of Osaka, Japan was rapidly expanding. Their local airport at the time was the Itami Airport, and it was landlocked, surrounded by neighborhoods, and really not able to be expanded at all. It also faced complaints about noise, so the city hatched a plan to build an airport that would be completely unrestricted out in the ocean. Kansai International Airport is one of the craziest engineering projects in modern history. It's built entirely on an artificial island in Osaka Bay. They created this completely new land by excavating nearby mountains and dumping millions of cubic meters of rock and earth into the sea. Another problem facing engineers was the fact that this is one of the most dangerous spots on Earth for natural disasters. This region is prone to earthquakes and typhoons, so not only did they need to build an island, they had to engineer it to survive basically everything nature could throw at it. Construction began in 1987, and from the very beginning, they had planned on the island sinking. That's just what happens when you pile tons of rock on a soft seabed. But it sank way more than engineers expected, almost 50% more. And that turned Kansai into one of the most expensive civil engineering projects of all time. They have had to reinforce and monitor the island constantly ever since, and it is still sinking. The airport is connected to the mainland by a long bridge that can carry both cars and trains. In 2018, during Typhoon Jebi, a tanker got blown into the bridge and severely damaged it. Thousands of passengers ended up stranded at the airport with no way off the island for hours, and it really demonstrated how vulnerable this location still is. Kansai remains the main international airport for Osaka, and it's a stunning piece of engineering that solved a huge space problem in a city that is still growing. They didn't have land, so they made some. And Kansai isn't the only airport that's had to get a little creative with geography. Let's head to Madeira, a tiny Portuguese island about 300 miles off the coast of Morocco. This island is stunning, but building an airport here was a bit of a nightmare. There's barely any flat land, and the winds on this island can be very intense. The original airport opened in 1964 with a short 1,600-meter runway. As tourism exploded in the 70s and 80s, they extended this runway to 1,800 meters, but it still wasn't enough. By the 90s, bigger jets wanted to fly to Madeira, but the runways were too short, and there simply wasn't any more flat land to build on, so their solution was to build out into the ocean. In 2000, engineers began a project to extend the runway to nearly 2,900 meters by adding a platform over the sea. It's supported by 180 giant concrete columns, and each one is about 70 meters tall. It's basically a massive bridge that planes land on. The whole thing is one of the most intense feats of airport construction ever attempted. But the location didn't just make construction difficult. The cliffs and hills around the airport forced pilots to make almost a full 180-degree turn before lining up with the runway. Combine that with Madeira's unpredictable crosswinds, and you've got one of the most challenging landings in all of Europe. Only specially trained pilots are allowed to fly in here, and many have said that it's one of the hardest landings of their careers. And yet, despite all of that, this is still quite a busy airport with a very solid safety record. It might be a bumpy landing, but you can rest assured knowing the engineering of this place is rock solid. While Madeira's airport stretches over the sea, the next airport cuts right through a road, and that's not even the craziest part. Gibraltar is a tiny British territory at the very bottom of Spain, and space here is even more limited. And there was really no way for them to situate this airport differently, so they built the airport across the main road into Spain. Cars, bikes, and pedestrians would all wait at the gates just like a train crossing while planes took off or landed. It was one of the only airports in the world where you could walk across an active runway if the lights were green. This all started back in World War II when Britain was using Gibraltar as a naval base. They needed an airfield and built it on the only flat land available right across the road. And for decades, that road-runway combo persisted, but it also created some pretty obvious problems. There were strict schedules and pretty constant delays, so a tunnel solution was proposed, and in 2023, they finally opened a tunnel that allows for uninterrupted traffic to pass underneath the runway. But it's really not just the layout that's tricky. The airport is surrounded by water on one side and the giant rock of Gibraltar on the other side, which creates a crazy crosswind from multiple directions. So it makes landing here tough, even for experienced pilots. And on top of that, Gibraltar's political status makes things even more difficult. It's a British territory, but Spain disputes its sovereignty, meaning airspace agreements and customs rules can be super tense. Even basic coordination with close-by airports has historically been complicated. But despite all of that, the airport still operates with surprising efficiency, especially now that the runway issues have mostly been eliminated. Now, if the Gibraltar airport feels cramped, meet the airport on Saba. This tiny Dutch Caribbean island is home to the shortest commercial runway in the world, at just 400 meters long, or about 1,300 feet. This airport opened in the 1960s after local politicians pushed for a way to better connect the island to the rest of the region. They didn't have a lot of flat land to work on, so they ended up carving out a small strip on a rocky peninsula. On one side, there's high hills, and on both ends, the cliffs drop straight into the ocean. Jets are not allowed to land here, and in fact, the only regular commercial service comes from Win Air, which runs a few daily flights to and from St. Martin using small turboprop planes. These planes are light enough to stop quickly and maneuver through the very tight approach. There is only visual flight rules allowed here, and the pilots have to be specially certified in order to land here. But even with all of those challenges, this little airport is a lifeline for this community. It brings in medicine, mail, fresh food, and tourists. Without it, Saba would be far more isolated. Now, speaking of tight landings, just across the water, there's another airport where you can stand directly below the planes as they land. This is Princess Juliana Airport on the island of St. Martin, and it is built right up against Maho Beach. The runway begins just meters from the edge of the sand, so when planes are on final approach, they are flying as low as 30 to 60 feet above people standing on the beach. It is one of the most unreal aviation sights you will ever see. Now, the difference between this airport and most of the ones I'm talking about today is this airport is a major commercial hub that sees regular service from wide-body planes. Pilots landing here have to stick exactly to their glide slope because this runway is pretty short for the size of the planes that land here. The airport was originally built as a military airstrip during World War II and then transitioned to commercial use after the war. As the island became a bigger tourist destination, the demand grew, but the land didn't, so they actually had to use reclaimed land to extend this runway as far as possible. Now, because the planes are so close to people, there are definite safety concerns with this airport. Fences and warning signs have been installed to keep people on the beach safe, but people still cling to the fence, which is not recommended. Pilots say landing here is not necessarily dangerous, but it's more intimidating than anything else. Either way, it's one of the most iconic approaches in the entire world. This airport has been at the top of my airport bucket list for years, and I cannot wait to go here one day. Now, if you think St. Martin's approach is intense, just wait until you see St. Barts. Just a short flight from Princess Juliana Airport is the island of St. Barts, and it is home to one of the most dramatic landings in the entire world. To land here, pilots have to fly right over a very steep hill, and then they dive down onto the runway and decelerate quickly before hitting the other end. Everything has to be done by sight, and only specially licensed pilots are allowed to fly in. The runway itself was built with a slight slope to help aircraft slow down faster once they touch down. And even with that, no plane carrying more than 20 passengers is allowed to land here. The airport officially opened in 1984, and since then, it has gained a reputation as one of the most difficult commercial airports to land at anywhere in the world. In the early 2000s, they even had to lower part of the hilltop and shift the road that's right underneath the approach in order to make it safer. But it's still a heart-pounding experience for both pilots and the passengers. Now, speaking of airports with gradients, the next one might as well be a ski jump. This is Courchevel Airport in the French Alps, and while it's not a full-time commercial airport, it is one of the most unique and intense airstrips in the world. It was built to provide quick access to the nearby Courchevel ski resort, and let's just say they really didn't have any flat land to work with. The runway is only 537 meters long, and it is built directly onto a steep mountain slope. It has an 18.5% gradient, which is actually steeper than some ski hills. Planes here land uphill and take off downhill, and there is no option to do a go-around here. Once you commit to landing, you are landing. Pilots have to be specially certified in order to fly into this airport, and they need some serious mountain flying experience in order to handle this approach. There's also no instrument landing systems, so everything is visual, and if the weather gets bad, this airport has to close. And not to mention, this airport is at a high altitude, so planes have to work even harder to take off. This makes it one of the more technically difficult landings in all of Europe. During the winter, the airline Alpine Airlines runs more than 400 seasonal flights here, making for a pretty fabulous vacation arrival. Now, while this airport is like landing on a ski slope, the next one is like landing on the edge of the earth. The Lukla Airport, officially named Tenzing Hillary Airport, is located in Nepal near Mount Everest, and it is one of the highest airports in the entire world. It sits at an altitude of 9,334 feet, and the runway is only about 1,700 feet long. On one end, there's a cliff that drops almost 2,000 feet, and the other end has a wall of mountains, so it's not exactly a forgiving airport. Lukla is the main airport used by trekkers heading towards Everest Base Camp. It is the gateway to the Himalayas, and because of the terrain, there's no go-arounds at this airport either. Once a pilot commits to landing, they have to land. The runway is sloped to help planes decelerate quickly, but the real challenge is just getting here. There's no radar system, no air navigation system, and only radio communication. If the weather turns bad or visibility drops, the airport has to close. It was built in 1964, and the original plan was to find a flat area to build it in, but every suitable piece of land was already in use, so they ended up building the airport in its current location. Getting materials here was a massive task. There are no roads, no machines, so everything had to be carried by hand or loaded onto animals. Even with all the risks, this airport is essential. It allows climbers, locals, and supplies to reach one of the most remote regions in the world. But it is often ranked as one of the most dangerous airports on Earth, and it's easy to see why. Would you fly in here? Let me know in the comments. But if Lukla isn't remote enough, this next one feels even more remote. Tucked away in a Himalayan valley, Paro Airport is the only international airport in Bhutan. It opened in 1968 as a small airstrip, and today it is one of the most challenging airports in the world to fly into. Less than 100 pilots in the entire world are certified to land here. The approach into Paro has been compared to threading a needle. The valley is surrounded by mountains that reach up to 18,000 feet, and the path to the runway winds through that tight terrain. Planes have to snake through the mountains and then bank sharply in order to land. And once again, this airport has no instrument landing system, flights are restricted to visual rules only, and if the weather is bad, planes are not able to land. To make it work, pilots undergo custom training specific to this airport, but even with the difficulty, the Paro Airport is an essential gateway for Bhutan. It connects the country with the rest of the world and allows people to explore a beautiful country. Now, moving on to an airport that is a little bit less remote than the airports we've talked about so far. The Aspen-Pitkin County Airport is one of the most challenging commercial airports in all of North America. It sits at nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, and it is surrounded by peaks that climb over 12,000 feet. The high elevation means the air is thinner, so engines don't perform as well, and planes need longer distances to take off. The terrain around Aspen means planes can only land and take off in one direction, so this airport requires some serious coordination during busy times. As with some of the other airports we've talked about, pilots require a special certification and mountain flying experience in order to land here safely. The airport itself started as a private gravel strip, but today it is a busy commercial airport. It has more commercial service than any other ski town in North America, and it also handles a steady stream of private jets, especially during the winter. Speaking of cold weather airports, another impossible place that airports have been built is in the Arctic. Svalbard is the northernmost airport in the world with regular jet service. It's located in Norway's Svalbard archipelago, just 800 miles from the North Pole. The biggest challenge for this airport is permafrost. The entire runway is built on frozen ground, and if that ground starts to melt, it could mess with the entire structure. So engineers had to get creative. The runway and terminal are actually built on insulated foundations with thermal protection systems underneath to keep the permafrost frozen. The airport is basically floating on a giant refrigerated platform. The runway has to withstand some pretty extreme temperature swings. It can go from -40 degrees to 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the same year. So every piece of the design has to account for that level of stress. Planes flying into Svalbard have to be specially equipped for polar operations, and crews receive extra training to handle Arctic emergencies. If something goes wrong, help can be a long ways away. And because Svalbard is home to more polar bears than people, passengers are advised to carry polar bear protection if they plan on leaving the airport area. This airport officially opened in 1975, replacing an older one from 1959 that could only operate during part of the year. Today, Svalbard Airport is a vital link between this remote region and the rest of the world, and it's built on ground that can literally never thaw. Now lastly, there's another airport that doesn't need to worry about the ground thawing. This is Williams Field in Antarctica, and it is the main airfield supporting on-continent operations for the US Antarctic program. This airfield is built directly on compacted snow and shifting ice. The runways are made by carving out packed snow and grooming it constantly. Special aircraft fitted with skis are able to land here, and operations are limited to just the Antarctic summer from October to February. Pretty much everything here is extreme. There are no roads, no ports, and really no real infrastructure. Every single person, every piece of equipment, every ounce of fuel or food has to be flown in. It is a massive logistical operation, and much of it runs through this ice runway. One of the craziest parts about Williams Field is that the buildings aren't anchored in place. They're built on giant adjustable skis so that the structures can be dragged and repositioned as the ice sheet shifts over time. And because Antarctica has been slowly melting, the whole airport has had to be moved and rebuilt several times since it was first established in the 1950s. None of these places were ideal locations for an airport, but yet they exist. Some were built out of necessity and others just out of ambition, but all of them remind us just how far humankind will go to make things work. Let me know which of these landings would terrify you the most. I always see the craziest videos come out of St. Barts, so I feel like that one would be crazy. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!